The American President Donald Trump, who likes to call himself the President of Peace and a man who has ended 7, 8, 9 wars, as he calls it, has now announced the American capture of the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, who have now been flown out from Venezuela by the Americans after their capture. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez has said that Venezuela demands for proof of life of President Nicolas Maduro. Now, putting out details on his social media handle, this is what the American President of Peace has said, that the operation was done in conjunction with the U.S. law enforcement agencies. And Trump announced that he'll be addressing a press conference on this operation at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida at 11 a.m. Eastern Time.
The National Armed Forces of the Bolivarian Nation informs the whole world that in the early hours of the morning, today 3rd of January, the Venezuelan nation has been the target of the most criminal military aggression by the government of the United States of America. Up to this moment, the barbarism of the invading forces that have profaned our sacred soil in the locations of Fuerte Tiuna, Caracas, the Miranda, Aragua, and La Guardia State fired their rockets and missiles from their combat helicopters in urban civilian areas, from where we are already gathering information with regards to injured and dead.
And ahead of his capture, the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro had declared a state of emergency after multiple explosions had rocked the capital city of Caracas in the wee hours of the morning. Now, talking to the United States, he called the attack an extremely serious military aggression on his country by the United States. Multiple blasts were seen lighting up the night sky in Caracas, followed by massive explosions and columns of smoke that was rising. At least about 7 explosions were reported across Venezuela.
I live here in Chacao, and approximately an hour and a half ago, we felt planes flying and explosions. Several explosions, at least 8 or 10. And now I went out to look around, and now all you see is smoke, smelling like creolin.
But according to reports, electricity was cut in the area and sounds resembling low-flying aircraft were heard at about 2 a.m. local time. And according to American media, which seemed to have very little information about what the Americans were up to in Venezuela, the Trump administration had said that they were aware of the reports of the explosion and aircraft over Caracas. These, of course, are American aircrafts and helicopters. Now, following the explosions, the Venezuelan government issued a statement denouncing what it termed American military aggression. Now, the government has said that the capital city of Caracas and states of Miranda, Aragua, and La Guaira were all bombed by the Americans, stating that the attack constituted a flagrant violation of national sovereignty and the United Nations Charter. The Venezuelan government further said that the objective of the Americans appears to be to seize Venezuela's oil and mineral resources. It assured the people of Venezuela that Caracas government remains steadfast in the defense of Venezuela's sovereignty. It's also given a call for mobilization and plans against American attacks. The Maduro government claimed that armed forces had been deployed to guarantee the sovereignty and peace of the nation. But remember, Maduro is no longer, if one were to go by the American word, according to Trump, Maduro and his family have been flown out of Venezuela after their capture. And before that, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro had signed a decree declaring a state of emergency and asserted the right to exercise the country's legitimate defense to protect the people. Now, since the 2nd of September last year, the American forces have been repeatedly carrying out various bombings in different parts of the Caribbean and the Pacific, killing more than 100 people, claiming that they were involved in narco trafficking of drugs into the United States. The 2 strikes occurred off the coast of Gran Roque, 1 strike in Sucre, 4 strikes off La Guaira, and 4 strikes near Buenaventura, and 2 strikes off Acapulco. Now, these incidents, in fact, mark a significant escalation in the American military activity, raising concerns about regional stability and security. Now, Russia also condemned the U.S. military action in Venezuela, saying that there is no tenable justification for this attack, and ideological hostility had prevailed over any semblance of diplomacy. In neighboring Colombia, the Colombian President Gustavo Petro has ordered for the deployment of military forces at the Venezuelan border. The U.S. Embassy in capital Bogota has urged its citizens not to travel to Venezuela. It has also urged all American citizens in Venezuela to depart immediately. It stated that since 2019, the U.S. Department of State had withdrawn all diplomatic personnel from U.S. Embassy in Caracas and had suspended operations. It further added that all consular services, routine and emergency, still remain suspended. Now, the embassy has further said that the U.S. government has no ability to provide emergency services to U.S. citizens in Venezuela. Now, the president of neighboring Colombia has called for an emergency meeting of the United Nations over the strikes. Now, taking to social media, he has said that Caracas is being bombed by American missiles. Now, earlier in the end of the year message to Venezuelans, the Nobel laureate and Venezuela's opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, who earlier, remember, had asked for American military intervention into Venezuela, had stated that 2026 will be the year of the consolidation of the nation's freedom.
From this beautiful people, I ask people to stay calm. Trust in our leadership. Trust in our military and political leaders during the situation we are facing. Calm. No one should fall into despair. No one should make things easier to our invading enemy.
All right, now joining us on the broadcast all the way from Hong Kong, we've got Mr. Lucio B. Pitlow, who is a foreign policy and security analyst and research fellow of Asia Pacific Pathways at the Progress Foundation. Mr. Pitlow, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, in your assessment, looking at what has transpired in Venezuela, although the things in Venezuela at this moment are still very fluid, the capture of Nicolas Maduro, what purpose does it serve for the Americans, and how do you think things change from here?
Thank you for having me. So, yeah, a lot of details remain to be announced. So far, what's coming out are coming from the U.S. side that they had launched these attacks and that Maduro were shown the door. And, of course, the concern on the part of Venezuela and I think Colombia and also the rest of South America and the Caribbean is the impact of this in terms of regional stability,
Right.
especially if the country would fall into some kind of internal conflict, instability.
Interesting. Now, how does China, in your assessment, look at what has happened in Caracas in the last 5-6 hours? Because for Venezuela, China was, of course, the biggest market. Venezuela was exporting anywhere from 800 to 900,000 barrels of oil, and 80 to 90% of that was going to China. And if Nicolas Maduro is gone, then an important source of oil for Chinese industries would have gone up in thin smoke. How do you think China will view this development?
Well, so far we heard Iran and Russia made statements, of course, opposing the move by the U.S., the attacks against Venezuela. But we had not heard, statement categorical from Beijing in relation to this development. But certainly the impact on the energy security of China, we would have to check how substantial it is. But knowing how diversified China's sources of energy is, of course, this would have an effect. But I think politically, diplomatically, the concern on the part of China is, the kind of the chilling effect this would have on other regimes or governments with which the U.S. have, of course, differences with ideological or political. notably Iran. Recently, of course, President Trump, made mention about discouraging the Tehran, government in Tehran from using force against protesters, in the ensuing, kind of civil discord in Iran. So I think Beijing would be watching developments not only in Venezuela but also in other countries like Iran, with which U.S. have very pronounced differences with.
Right. Now, in the last 2 decades, China had been increasing its influence in Latin America as well, predominantly as an important trading partner. Now, the Americans want to reimpose what they call the Monroe Doctrine, where they want the Western Hemisphere to be under the hegemony of the Americans. How does China view the fact that the Americans are willing to go and kidnap or capture a president of a sovereign nation which had friendly ties with China? Do you think this could happen in other Latin American nations as well?
Yeah, I think that's the concern. The Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, launched during the National Security Strategy document release of the U.S. Of course, even Colombian President Petro had been, ruffled feathers with President Trump. And of course, being a close direct neighbor of Venezuela, the impact in terms of refugees and instability, and the kind of behavior that U.S. exhibited, off the Caribbean in the last months, from September onwards, from amassing the largest armada of the Caribbean since the end of the Cold War. So
Right.
I think this would have some kind of chilling effect on other leaders in the region, with which U.S. may have, political, ideological differences, including countries of BRICS countries,
Including BRICS countries. I'll come to Brazil in just a bit, but I want to talk about, Colombia, which you just mentioned there. Gustavo Petro, the leftist leader, does not get along very well with Donald Trump, although Colombia historically has very close relations with the United States of America. There are about 7 military bases, which the Americans, in fact, although they don't have a permanent military base there, they do operate out of 7 of the Colombian military bases. But Gustavo Petro, when he was in New York last September for the UNGA, had spoken out against Donald Trump's policy on the Gaza Strip. In fact, after delivering a speech inside the United Nations General Assembly Hall, he stepped out and joined the pro-Palestinian protesters, for which his visa was cancelled by the Americans. How do you think he will be looking at the fact that Donald Trump has decided to capture/kidnap Nicolas Maduro, his neighbor in the Latin American world?
Agree. So while sure that Presidents Trump and Petro don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but at the same time, President Petro doesn't necessarily endorse, President Maduro's government, or regime in Caracas. But I think he had a lot of reservations about the way this, in the last, developments in the last 24 hours happened. And of course, he already made mention in his social media that he alerted the whole world and was hoping to, convene the OAS and the UN to bring this matter. So I think that underscores the cause of serious unease on the part of Colombia about developments in its neighboring country, Venezuela.
Right. And also the fact, in the lead up till 5-6 hours ago, a lot of people had said that the Venezuelan military, the different Venezuelan militia, they'd all been by and large loyal to Nicolas Maduro. And now with the fact that Nicolas Maduro has been captured by the Americans, quite clearly by the American CIA operatives and the military there, how do you think things will pan out inside of Venezuela? Because the Venezuelans, it does not appear, are going to take it kindly if the United States were to helicopter drop a leader to lead Venezuela.
Yes, I think that's a real source of anxiety right now. So going into Venezuela, making this very bold attack, on sovereign country like Venezuela is one thing. What follows is, of course, everyone's guess. We have seen such types of interventions from Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, attempts to change government or induce change in government in a sovereign country does not always lead to, uh, the desired
Right.
change. Sometimes they ensued civil war, which may last several years. And so taking down Maduro in this case, it may be the ultimate objective.
Right.
But what happens may not necessarily be, to the region's liking, even to U.S. interests. So we would have to see in the coming days and weeks.
I think that's an important point you've brought up there, Mr. Pitler, because even in the American experience of what they did with their invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq in the year 2001 and 2003, it was easy for them to topple the government that existed in Kabul and in 2003 with Saddam Hussein in Baghdad. But once they had managed to topple the governments there, the Americans did not get their way in putting in place a government of their choice, because what happened in the aftermath of the governments being toppled there was wide-scale insurgency against the puppet regimes that were propped up by the Americans. Do you expect something of that nature will happen here again if Americans try to install the next leader in Venezuela?
Well, I think the Venezuelan public opinion would have to be assessed on this. I think the view that, the opposition in exile, the leader, in the report earlier said that 2026 would be like a year of change in consolidating, a government, a new government in her home country, and trying to egg or nudge or encourage U.S. military intervention. So if the Venezuelans view this leader, the opposition leader in exile, as someone close more to Washington than to the the public view in Venezuela, I don't think she would have an easy time,
Right.
transitioning to the new leader of Venezuela. And if that happens, a lot of alternative scenarios can come, including protracted instability in this oil-rich strategic country in South America.
Interesting. And talking about Maria Corina Machado, she just was given the Nobel Prize for Peace. She was the Venezuelan opposition leader, and she had to flee from her country. Now, if she indeed had popular support, then she would have appealed to the people of Venezuela to restore democracy. Instead, she, in the past, has appealed to the American President Donald Trump to intervene militarily, which he has now done. Do you think the people in Venezuela will now look at her more as a pawn of the Americans than as any kind of a popular leader?
Well, I think that is the kind of imagery or projection that Machado would have to distance with. Really have to be very cautious about. Otherwise, the public, regardless of their view about the Maduro government, if they see the Machado as someone installed, or have been put up there in Caracas by Washington, which just bombed, attacked sovereign territory of Venezuela, I don't think that the public would, embrace or accept her easily, and so that would have an effect on her leadership. So I don't think it's in the best of her interest to be seen or associated with the U.S., especially after these recent attacks.
Now, I want to circle back to how China would, of course, look at this act of American intervention and what is effectively a regime change in Latin America. The fact that the United States just last month announced military aid to Taiwan to the tune of about $11 billion. How do you think China would be looking at all of this, considering that Americans have been intervening in different parts of the world and they seem to be getting their way, but they, that is the Americans, have this policy of trying to contain China and have been arming Taiwan against China?
Well, certainly, we have already heard the protest and opposition of Beijing in relation to the recent U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. And I think the behavior of the U.S. in relation to Venezuela, from the blockade up until the attacks, the direct attacks on the territory of Venezuela, not to mention the earlier attacks on boats on the basis of, suspected carrying drugs, allegedly, reportedly bound for the U.S. And so this kind of behavior may send unwanted signals or even set a potential template or, a playbook, for U.S. near competitor, China. And I don't think, even U.S. allies in the Asia Pacific would be very concerned about this kind of parallels that, China may pounce on or, use this kind of standards,
Right.
especially with its neighbors with which it has long-standing and unresolved territorial and maritime disputes with.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.